Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this afternoon's discussion. We're going to talk today about basic Social Security in the 21st century, and specifically about an ELF publication launch that we're actually going to talk about today and hear more details about. Here, this location here, just so you know, is the Do & Co Hotel and Restaurant in Vienna. It has a fantastic view over the Stephansdom, St. Stephen's Cathedral. And here in the background, you see the very, very quiet city of Vienna, because we are currently in Corona lockdown, which is why we're having a hybrid event today. Here in the studio, we have Christiane Varga, and we're going to have the rest of our speakers will be over a Zoom call, so remotely with us. But we're very happy to say hello to all of our viewers in the live stream. Just a quick introduction to what we'll be speaking about today. So the European Union and its member states are heralded around the world for having some of the best high-level, comprehensive welfare and social services in the world. But it's becoming increasingly difficult and also increasingly clear that these systems have existed for over 70 years and that they can no longer keep up with the realities of changing societies and changing structures in society. So we're actually seeing now that they're not only faltering in considerable ways, but there's need for improvement and need for adaptation and reform on a lot of levels. So here next to me, author Christiane Varga has shown in her recent study that new ideas, concepts, and models are needed for the social policies of the future to rectify these situations. And before we get to talking about that in specific, I'd like to welcome Daniel Kadek, the Executive Director of ELF, for a few welcoming words.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Thank you very much for organizing this today, for being with us, and very warm regards to Vienna. It's very sad that we can't be together today, but that's the world we live in. And the world we live in is indeed something that also triggered the idea for this very publication that we're going to talk about today. Maggie, you mentioned in the beginning already, the world is changing. Social security systems have to adapt to that. And this is also why one of the reasons why we have decided with our dear partners, NEOS Lab in Vienna, to have this publication, to have this study, and give some answers to the very relevant questions about how to design future-proof social security systems in Europe. And this is not the first time that the European Liberal Forum, especially together with NEOS Lab, is doing that. I recall a very, very good publication that I only can recommend you. It's called You Had One Job, which was focusing on the future of employment. And this all fits very nicely together, of European liberals coming and making up their minds about how we can structure work, social security, and living together in the future. However, I have to disagree with one thing that you said earlier. It's not a new thing that we are discussing now. One part of the publication is how we could have a universal basic income, for instance, or a negative income tax, a system that was already discussed in the 1970s by Milton Friedman. Something that is, I think, still very relevant, because it has in its core the idea of responsibility, of being responsible for your own life. Something that is very interesting and very important for liberals to keep in mind. But at the same time, it also has another liberal principle that we should not forget, and that is solidarity. Might not always be in the opinion of all liberals, but solidarity, good living together in a society, is also a liberal principle. So therefore, there have been topics around, there have been ideas around, and I would like to just use my favorite word when it comes to the social security system and how to make it future-proof, and that is flexicurity. I know that is the Danish labor market concept, which was badly adapted then in Germany with the Agenda 2010. But the idea behind it is so relevant, and it's something, again, that liberals should really put in their diaries. Give people security on the one hand, but also demand something from them and make them feel secure so they can be flexible in the working approach. Not everybody will be a big data analyst in the future. Not everybody will be having such an easy time adapting to the changing circumstances. But how we can manage that as a society, this is part and parcel of the publication that we're going to discuss today. So thank you very much, Christiane, for this fantastic publication. Thank you very much, NEOS Lab, for always being on our side, to be one of our 47 members all around Europe. It is putting so much hard work into that. And I have to say one last word about that. And I don't want to sound like I'm smooching onto NEOS Lab at the moment. And that's not only because I love Vienna, but NEOS Lab has been on the forefront of bringing the topic of social welfare, future of social welfare, future of labor into the hearts and minds of liberals all across Europe. And I think that's something that deserves applause. So thank you very much, Dieter. Basically, as the recipient today on behalf of NEOS Lab, thank you all the speakers, and thank you very much in advance for a fantastic discussion that we're going to have.
Thanks very much, Daniel Kadik. We actually have a short video that we'd like to show that gives a little bit of an overview of the project. And Daniel, we'd like to come back later on to what the points and the impulses that you gave when we talk in the discussion. Thanks so much. Let's see the video.
How is the social life changing? This was life in the 20th century. And this will be life in the 21st century. Obviously, our society is changing faster than ever, and so is our social security system. The more complex and confusing life becomes, the more attractive are simple answers. But it's not always that easy. So, what does societal change mean? Primarily, we're getting older. But the growing number of the aging population in Europe leads to more individualized lifestyles. With it comes globalization, mobility, new working models, digitalism, AI, environmental and economic change, and disruptions and crises like the corona pandemic. Challenges people have to face now and then. But how to cope with an ongoing societal change? European politicians must understand that self-organization and resilience are acquiring greater importance. Therefore, policymakers on European and national levels need to take action and create a legal framework for a basic social security system, design network approach-based politics, strengthen financial resilience, establish participative and transparent politics, empower citizens and promote welfare states to be active. Solutions can be found in different places, both large and small.
Fantastic. So we've seen now a little bit of an overview, and I'm sorry about the audio difficulties at the beginning, but please bear with us. We've seen now a little bit overview of the project and what goes into it, not only the problems that we're seeing in society that go into it, also the thought process. And as Daniel said, these are not necessarily new concepts or new ideas of how to change society. So now, without further ado, we're going to get a little bit deeper into the project itself and the study. And Christiane has prepared a presentation for us that she will delve deeper now into what it actually means to talk about basic social security in the 21st century. Christiane, take it away.
Thanks so much, Maggie. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hello. My name is Christiane Varga, as you already know, and I work in the field of trend and future forecast here in beautiful Vienna. We have a really nice view here. So yeah, I'm happy to discuss the study we were working on. So let's go straight ahead to the question why we did this study. To answer it in one sentence, it's because the classic model of social security is based on a social structure, is based on a society that no longer exists. The world is changing, society is changing, and the old model doesn't fit anymore. Society is changing tremendously. The way we live, the way we work, the way we are in relationships is so different, for example, in comparison to the industrial age, that we need to adapt, that we need to reconfigure the system. I think every system somehow, but for sure the system of basic social security, because it's the base. We can ask as well, and Daniel, you said that before in some different words, how can we, as a major society, as a society on a next level somehow, ensure that people live self-empowered lives and are, of course, supported when necessary, but in a good and new way. So before I go into more detail on what is changing, I think it's pretty good to take a look on how it's changing. And it's interesting because change, there are some patterns of change which are following a certain logic. And this goes into my work as a future forecaster, because future development, evolution is not linear. It's not something that it's linear. It's not a higher, faster, further. I think that's the main misunderstanding of the industrial age, that we were thinking everything has to go up like forever and eternal. I think this structure does fit much more in our times. Don't worry, it looks a little complicated, but the only thing you have to know, there's always a starting point. It can be on a company or society, but even in your own life. Yeah, there is your birth. And then there is evaluation, there is development. The things are getting more and more complex. And then there are some routines. Then you have a status quo, which everything works and you know everything. And then the environment is changing. And the status quo isn't that stable anymore. A crisis follows. We have that now. The routines doesn't work anymore. We have to access to reserves, but yeah, it's confusion, it's chaotic. Then I think we are these days now in a very high confusion. What should we do? The old models doesn't work anymore. Old roles and hierarchies are overruled. We have to improvise. A lot of improvisation is needed now. And that's the point. And I think the main insight in this structure is that the crisis is not the end. It's just the point of reconfiguration. It's the point of transformation. It's a point where we have to get into new ideas and new concepts. And for me, it's like a lazy 8 somehow. This model is a good motivation, I think, and an obligation as well, to change our society now in something better than before. So let's go into the more detailed way of what are the main drivers of change. There are 4 main drivers. We saw it in the video as well. The one main driver is the individualization of lifestyles. For example, in the industrial age, we had this really linear, very predictable biography lives. There were one job, one family structure, and one point of living. Nowadays, and in the future even more, we have a lot of non-linear biographies. They're much more fragmented, they're multidimensional. This results in different things, so we are just switching jobs more often than before, we're switching relationships and partner more often than before, and our place of living. Patchwork families are evolving, couples living apart together. In the future, even more, an increasing amount of singles, and of course a higher level of mobility and these switches. So now the presentation is here again, the migration, that was the point. One reason of all that, of this really multidimensional lifestyle, is that our life is getting longer. That's a really easy fact. The demographic change in the aging society is one of the main drivers of the 21st century. In 2050, 16% of people in the world will be over-aged 65. In comparison to 2019, there were only 9%. The population aged 65 plus is globally growing faster than all other age groups. That's enormous. I mean, we never had this before in human mankind. At the same time, people are aging much later than previous generation. I think that's important to keep in mind, that we're not only getting older and older, but we stay younger at the same time somehow. So there's a completely new life phase we have to deal with, to get new pictures of age and to get new concepts in terms of living together with a lot of old but still young people. The third driver of change is an increase of mobility. Europe always was a continent of migration, but in the last 35 years, each year more people moved into the European Union than left. Location, that's kind of a new mindset, loses its binding power. Home becomes a relative term. Being mobile for a lot of people is a lifestyle somehow. It's a cultural obligation. And still, of course, for some people, it's still a need to get the opportunity to live a better and wealthier life. And that's the reason they come to Europe. We had this mentioned already with the other publication. You had one job, the economic transformation in labor market, digitalization, flexibilization, we all know it. A lot of employers or contact providers are on platforms such as Uber. There are new concepts and infrastructures, and that you have like a job in full workload your whole life. This is getting less and less common. So there's a huge transformation in the way we live and work. The lines are getting more and more blurred. And this leads in a very new structure of society as a whole. Dirk Becker, a German sociologist, he calls it the next society. And the structural form of the next society is no longer a functional differentiation into clearly defined subsystems such as politics, economic, culture, art, but everything is getting more and more into the form of a complex network. So Dirk Becker describes it as, with this network society, a new type is emerging that is as different from modern society as electricity is from mechanics. So we really need to change our mindset, our point of view, to get this new structure in mind and to act differently. So what does that mean in politics? I mean, we know the three sectors, and here we can observe a three-sector shift. The first sector is the politics, the public services. The second one is the market, the companies. The third sectors are the non-profit organizations. And now something like a fourth sector is evolving. There are new forms of social participation and self-organization. And you can notice it globally, local and global. We call that glocal. So that a lot of people are thinking, okay, I want to organize myself. I want to solve problems like in a quarter, in a urban or rural area. It doesn't matter. There are a lot of different examples. And I don't want to wait till politics or NGOs or something are helping with my problem. And this is kind of a new mindset evolving, which has a lot to do with self-empowerment and the really will to live a meaningful and sensible life. And it's important to understand in this case that it's not the point that one sector is better than the other, but we can observe that everything is going into this fourth sector, and that the fourth sector interacts with the existing sectors, and this in general can strengthen and can make a society more resilient. Because the principle of a network is flexicurity. It's flexible and robust at the same time because it can adapt very much in a world that is getting more and more complex as today. So, of course, we discussed in the study as well new models and experiments. how can we finance everything in this 21st century? How can we finance basic social security? Again, there was, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the discussion about the unconditional basic income. But now it's getting stronger and stronger because we really need to rethink how we can act and how our system works when something like COVID-19 is happening. There are some experiments, I think we will discuss them in the discussion afterwards, about the Finnish basic income. And there is a German project, mein Grundeinkommen.de, where the unconditional basic income is financed by crowdfunding. It can be an option maybe as well. In general, this connectivity in combination with digitalization reshapes our society, and there are a lot of signals regarding to this connected society, like connective care networks, new real digital neighborhoods, or different ways of co-living, like the co-living spaces. And that's the point. You can't separate all these new signals of change from the topic basic social security, because I think we need to think society more resilient and more holistic to cope and deal with the whole complexity we have today and in the future. So we had these conclusions and policy recommendations. Because we live in such dynamic times, because society and the world is getting more and more complex, a systemic view can help a lot. If you have this network approach when designing policies, to be much more experimental. It's so important not to think like 10 years about new solutions, but to try them, maybe in small groups or small areas. So let's dare more experiments. Of course, when society is changing, we also need new indicators for a new society. We need to strengthen the financial resilience because the old structure doesn't work anymore. Participative and transparent politics on a national level is a must-have in the future. It's so important because people are longing to participate. And all this can fusion in an activative welfare state where we have empowered citizens, where everybody is can live his own life or her own life, but is in a good solidarity network. So it's more not about an either or, but it goes in the direction of an as well as. So I think now this huge change is a really fantastic option and an obligation, as I already said, to ask the question, how do we want to live? How do we want to rethink our society? And how do we want to rethink our future? So let's start with this now. Thank you.
Christiane, thanks so much. I think a lot of those thoughts are things that have gone through many people's heads, in not only policymakers, but social sciences scientists like yourself, but just generally this idea of, yes, we're all getting older, but we're also getting older less quickly in a way, right? I mean, look at 65-year-olds today and compare it to 65-year-olds 30 years ago, and it's night and day, right? So also what you said before about having new indicators, I think that's a really important thing for policymakers to think about. You know, we can't measure things in the same way we measured them before. How do we see things like that? So before I get too excited, I'm going to invite our other panelists in to the panel discussion. We'd like to welcome Dieter Feierabend. He is scientific director of the NEOS lab, and Niklas Manfork, who is a special advisor to the Finnish Minister of Justice. So we are a pan-European panel today, and of course, Christiane is sticking with me here in Vienna. So, hello.
And good evening.
Hello, Dieter. Hello, Niklas. Fantastic to see you both. So we were hearing before that Europe has, systems that were built 70 years ago and have undergone small changes, incremental adaptations and reforms since then, but these systems are becoming harder and harder to adapt and are adapting very slowly. And the slower they adapt, it seems the faster our society is changing. So when we think about Social Security now and reflecting what you said about the changing lifestyles and the changing ways in which we interact, how can we really view the status of welfare states today? I mean, specifically in Europe. Maybe let's start with Dieter from the kind of more data science view.
Sure, thank you very much. Which is exactly one of the reasons why I started this project and the study together with our colleagues from the SBF in Finland and the MLS in Portugal. And the reason is it's difficult you see that things are changing, you feel it, but it's really difficult to really assess how much things are changing. And one of the things we are seeing is that you have more and more challenges in the daily practices of the social welfare state. So just for an example, when you think of poverty, one of the dimensions of poverty is social inclusion. And part of this social inclusion is whether you have a TV or whether you can afford a TV. And for example, I do not have any a TV since 4 years ago. I sold it. So we have the principles, the core principles that were developed in the 1960s, where you have, the roaring economies, then nationalized economies, and where thought of inclusion as having new things like TV stations. But we haven't really thought about the basic principles, and we need to measure those things. We need to tell the questions or ask the questions, how are things working together? And we need to have discussions like this because our societies are even more interconnected. It's, we have now roughly 1 million people who are each year going from one EU member state into the other. So those things changes our social security systems, and we need to find solutions and then the common core framework because especially during Corona, we see that our welfare states really have major challenges.
I think we can experience that definitely in Austria for sure. We have 8 neighboring countries here in Austria. We have borders to 8 different countries. I think that makes a lot of these kind of bureaucratic hurdles very visible to us. Germany has a similar situation. Now, if we look a little bit further north and to a smaller country, Niklas, how is this reflected in Finland and maybe the neighboring countries when it comes to your evolution of the welfare state?
Well, thank you first of all for inviting me. The evolution of the Finnish, or I'd like to say the Nordic welfare state, has been something that everyone is. The entire world is looking up to at the moment. Even the soon-to-be ex-president of the United States mentioned how good we are doing with our welfare systems. And the fact is that I suppose the let's say problem or the issue that is seldom failed to mention in conjunction with our welfare state is the fact that we pay quite a lot of taxes to have the welfare state that we do have. But there's an interesting difference between the evolution of the Finnish welfare state compared, for example, to the Swedish one, where our driving force was the fact that after the Second World War and the consequent wars with Russia that kept going, we had to build up our country from pretty much scratch, and that sort of was the basis of our system. Whereas Sweden has had less difficulty with wars, and their albeit similar welfare state has been built on different premises. But I think the most important thing to think about when looking at our systems is that yes, it might be bureaucratic, but there is there's a sort of a strong understanding for everyone who is in the welfare state, who is participating in it and participating in the financing of it, that sort of anyone could and does technically need the resources for that of that welfare state. So I think it's mainly sort of mental understanding of the need of the welfare state that is important. This is in the core of the evolution of our systems, if you catch my meaning.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point that you made there, that Finland was in a special situation, kind of starting from scratch, being able to build a system in a relatively modern world in comparison to other member states. But I mean, we have this diversity of timing, of this diversity of evolution, as we called it before, of the various welfare systems in the member states. And when you look at Europe as a whole, as Niklas said, there's this general understanding, and I think that most Europeans are in agreement that these things are important and we need to uphold them and we need to make them work. That being said, Christiane, in your research and in what you have seen, is there a mismatch or a lack of comprehensive understanding between member states and the kind of European view of what the social welfare system should be or how it should change?
Yeah, I think so. That it is like a little mismatch, but I think it's normal. I mean, there are so different member states, and they have, as we heard it now, they're coming from different directions as well, and it depends on which level you enter. Of course, I think the common thing is that in Europe we really want to make it possible for people to live a good life, to live a good individual life, which is safe. And when something happens, like an illness or you have an accident or something else, that you're safe somehow to still live a good life. I think this is a really good thing in a advanced and mature society. But how the system is making that possible, this needs to be discussed in a different way. And I think the mountain is too high now to climb or to start even climbing, when we think, okay, we have to have this very comprehensive point of view, or we have to come really all from the same level. I think I'm really a friend of experiment somehow, of trying. So where can we see where is a more innovative place, maybe in terms of mindset and so on, and where can we try to install new forms and new structures with the trial and error principle. Mm-hmm. And it's the way trends or evolution are like evolving. You have the law of the fuse, where you really try something out with some people on a structure, and then if it works, it's spreading. It's the same principle as a virus, and then there is a tipping point, and then you can it goes into the mainstream, or like everybody's. And I think this, like a little more experimental point of view, can help in these dynamic and complex times.
I think what you're saying is also actually interestingly reflective of what Niklas was saying about having this almost luxury of starting from scratch. Not really a luxury, I guess, at the time. It probably wasn't seen that way. But in retrospect, this kind of luxury of being to design a system that can work for decades to come. This idea of experimentation and this idea of it spreading in a kind of viral way and then becoming mainstream and becoming adopted. That in a way, if we think about current still sitting President Trump saying that the Nordics have such a good welfare system, he didn't mention the taxes, I'm sure, that are paid for that system. So if we think about member states versus the union and saying, okay, we can experiment. We spoke a little earlier about the size of those kind of experiments. How big can a sandbox be? Can we actually have full member states doing experiments for the entire EU? Is that a possibility, or should that be seen as, okay, that's a best practice, this is a use case we can look at. You mentioned having regional experiments. How should we anticipate that really growing to a European-wide system? Will member states ever be able to say, okay, we're glad to pay into a system that also pays for a Romanian's healthcare, or also pays for an Italian's healthcare, or a Portuguese healthcare, or Social Security in general, pensions? Do you think that's a possibility in the future?
Oh, well, it depends on when in the future.
Yeah,
well, yeah,
I left it vague
Yes.
on purpose. So you tell me when. You're the futurologist.
Next 2 years. Oh, I'm not that sure, but yeah, that would be great to rethink that as a whole, and to strengthen the feeling of European Union. But I think it's possible. Why? Because not only on idealistic reasons, because there is such a huge movement in Europe, and some people from Romania, they live in Germany, but then they're moving to Austria or something like that. And so there is on a very personal level, solidarity feeling and something like that. So I think it can go in two directions, or it can go into this direction. Yeah, why not? And that, I mean, the really idea of frontiers in the minds, it's getting more and more blurred. Mm-hmm. And I think if we think about the future, we don't have to think about not that national. It's important to think national as well in some contexts, of course, but as well international and like more in mindsets or regions or something like that. And this is, I'm sorry, just one sentence. This is the thing I was saying in terms of the as well as and not neither nor. It's this structure of network thinking.
It has to happen simultaneously from all of these parts.
Yes.
Dita, if we're looking at it from an Austrian perspective, Austria is a relatively small country, but also we have a lot of international people and Europeans from other member states living in Austria. Do you think that idea of a collective good has already arrived in Austria? Is that something that we could say is stronger here maybe than in other member states? Is it weaker here? Is there a way that can be compared on a European level, Dita?
Well, I think it's not really into the mindset of a lot of people, both citizens but also policymakers. Because, I mean, if you think about yesterday in the Austrian parliament, there was the debate about rising the minimum pensions. But there is one thing. If you, for example, live 10 years in Germany and then move to Austria, of course, you do not have the same years of contributions within the Austrian pension system. But you have contributed 10 years to the German pension system. So I think the whole mindset of what our daily life actually are working out in terms of all the social security system, they are neither in the society nor in politics. And I think, if I may add one thing, diversity is a strength. We have talked in the first round that we have so much different lifestyles, which from a liberal point of view, it's great to live the lives how people want. And if we want to find new solutions, having to a certain degree a variation of social security systems is good, because then we can really find better solutions if we have tackled the same challenges in various contexts, and we really find good solutions. I think what's important, both for creating the missing mindset I do not see in Austria, but also to connect to Niklas and to Christiane, is to have a core framework, a core understanding of what does social security mean. So, for example, how does this network approach? How does the mobility works out? And that cooperation is not something you do as a bonus or to be seen good. So cooperation with other institutions, NGOs, but also member states is part of our daily living.
I think that what you said about mobility is a super important factor in this, and the pension example is also really great. We heard before from Daniel that there's this this idea also of taking responsibility for your own life, right? That also the individual within the system should be given the power to take responsibility for themselves. Is this idea something that would mean, I'm just playing out your scenario, Dieter, just with the pension systems? If somebody collected, for instance, paid in for 10 years in Germany and worked then for 5 years in Austria and then worked for 5 years in Finland, and then they decide to retire in Spain, should they collect from the 3 different pension systems in those 3 countries? That's how it currently would happen, question mark. Should that just continue the same way? Should this be bundled?
Well, to start from a really basic point of view, first of all, the state where you're living in should know where you contributed how much to really assess how your financial situation is, for example, which is not necessarily possible right now. So we need to share the information, and we really need to assess, for example, if you contributed in 3 regions, then of course, I would say, from a kind of a logic, that the money should follow you, because at the end of the day, the state is something we collectively agree on to make our lives better, and we should not adjust to some regulatory regimes we have set up, so they have to change to fit to our lifestyles. So from a basic principle, just as a hot take, I think that the money should follow you instead of you following wherever the money sits.
Niklas, is that approach something that is reflected in the way Finland deals with the kind of mobility within the EU? So EU members who currently live in Finland or collect pensions in Finland?
Well, I just have to start by saying that that even though I think the idea of a sort of a shared pension system or even a shared social security system could be pretty good, but politically it's often seen as at least in Finland, as something that the country should take care of itself, as something of a national issue also within the EU. Having said that, we do have. From my own experience, we have fairly good systems with again our closest neighbor Sweden. I've worked there myself, some summer jobs, and I still get for some reason on paper, but nevertheless I get a letter home every year that shows me that this is the 6 more euros you will be getting pension once you retire because of your work, the work that you've done in Sweden. But it's in no way connected so that my sort of Finnish system would show the Swedish system. What we've been trying to do, partially my party and especially my boss. Minister of Justice Henriksson has been speaking of a Nordic electronic ID system, which would mean that everyone working within a Nordic country would have access to the same system, and that sort of Nordic ID system could be something we should look into also on the EU level. But having said that, I have to go back to the fact that there is a strong political will, I think, in most countries, like I think you already mentioned, to keep the social security and the pensions within the country's system, mainly because of the money, I suppose.
I think that's, I think we can definitely reflect that in Austria. I think Germany feels the same way. The countries are such different sizes, such different demographics. But there's also, I think it's interesting, as you mentioned a few things now that are really technologically driven, actually. So if we're thinking about a system that could reflect all of Europe, maybe not cover all of Europe at the onset, but follow someone around, as Tito said, follow the person rather than the nationality, so to say, then this kind of ID number. Again, you said this example is for the Nordics. That maybe it's a bigger it's a bigger piece of the European pie, but not all of the EU. Would that kind of an ID number, following someone around, is that kind of a technological step just as hard for politicians to make? This is a question in my mind as a citizen, not even an EU citizen, but as a European-minded person. Is that politically as difficult as the idea of I'm paying for the healthcare of a Romanian or I'm paying for the pension of a Romanian? Is the idea of they can take their pension with them using this number? Is that as hard for politicians to deal with? I'm not sure who I'm asking this question to. I'm looking at Christiane, I'm looking at Niklas, I'm not sure, or Dita, whoever wants, jump in.
I mean, we have it in a certain view. I mean, if you have a healthcare ID, for example, Maggie, if you have an Austrian healthcare ID, just turn it around and you see there is an EU number. So if I, for example, go to the Czech Republic and I have a car accident there, and I go into the hospital, there is an EU number, so I get healthcare access. And then my Austrian healthcare insurer knows exactly what has happened or what I got in terms of medication. So I think the infrastructure, that's a core point. I mean, it's not necessary that we need all the same things you get from different areas, but I think the connectivity in terms of information sharing, that's really a core point. And we have done it in the healthcare system, but we really need to do that also in terms of the social security system to have this backbone. Because, for example, just think about, to go to Niklas' example of the pension system. When you, one of the things that we try to do as a society is to alleviate poverty, old age poverty. So this is linked to kind of the contribution you have in terms of the labor market and so on. And just think of it, if you work 10 years in Sweden and the Austrian labor market or the Austrian system, the eines, for example, or whatever, knows exactly that you get, let's say, 10 euros or 50 euros per month from the Swedish system in terms of pension. That really affects when we talk about old age poverty. So if I'm 50 and I'm unemployed and the Austrian labor market system knows I get 50 euros from them, and this is the Austrian contribution, then you know, okay, we have this amount of sum that I would get, and now we have to find a solution to close the gap. But we don't know those things yet. So I think the core backbone really is this information sharing, which we already have done in the healthcare system.
I think the healthcare system is also a great example. We just saw that exemplified, or we're seeing it at the moment exemplified through Brexit, actually, because British citizens in Austria who are not, who for instance came here as pensioners, have never paid into the healthcare system here, and were living off of their NHS, healthcare that they had paid into in the UK, and now that because of Brexit, because they have never paid into the Austrian healthcare system, they can't receive Austrian healthcare on a normal way. And this is a big, huge problem now for legislators to figure out what should their contribution be. So, so while that is a good example, it's also exemplified kind of how we can be tripped up a little bit in that concept. Sorry, you wanted to...
No, sorry, just to add on something, because it's so interesting. It shows that digitalization, of course, we're still at the beginning somehow, I think, can boost a whole new infrastructure to deal with all these things, with the electronic ID and so on, and information. But, and you see here how complex everything is, there you have all the topic with, we talked already about it, data transparency, data security, and so on. So this is so huge, and I think a lot of states and a lot of people working at politics, I mean, it's understandable, but they still not know how to deal with it or how to install everything, because you have to rethink so many things, even in terms of legislation and so on. So this is a good practice and example as well, that we can see that this kind of silo thinking is not working anymore. We have to get together with like IT experts, with like sociologists and so on to deal like more together these new questions evolving.
I think it's interesting that we take, I mean, this idea of the network, but also idea of actually within a bigger change having these incremental changes. So like Dieter said with this example of on the back of the e-card in Austria, you have the European emblem, and it means that you're covered no matter where you are in Europe. And that's, that's a small step for I guess for the citizen or for the person saying, oh, okay, now when I'm on vacation, I don't have to use my credit card insurance, or I don't have to, get travel insurance extra because I know I'll be fine. However, on a managerial level or an infrastructural level, that was a big step. A lot of people probably got together to make that happen, that little piece of that little EU symbol on the back of the card. So the question is a little bit with this network thinking and this idea of sandboxes, what kind of steps can we take? We spoke earlier, and we heard from Niklas also this examples. Each country, each member state has already thought about how can we make it bigger? How can we make it, the Nordics are thinking about how can we unify at least the Nordic countries in this way. And Austria is thinking about its neighboring countries as well. Is this how it's going to be? Are the bubbles just going to get bigger in different ways and eventually Venn diagram over each other and merge? Or how do you think this is going to happen?
Yeah, well, I don't have the answer, of course, but I think it can only happen in a more organic way, because we were so the last years, and it was clear after the world wars. There was a lot of wealth and our society here, or in Central Europe was very stable, but predictable as well because of that, because nothing changed that much. But if so many things are changing, you can't plan it. I mean, it's not possible. It's logical that it's not possible. You have to go step by step, build different scenarios, what might be possible, and then, like a bubble that way. You said here a bubble, maybe you can merge some bubbles together or something, and to make it grow more organic. And this sounds so soft somehow or strange, but I really deeply believe that we're, as a whole society globally, are now on a point where the two ways are going in this or this direction. And if we go this direction, everything is going more chaotic and we have some more problems. But if we're going in the other direction and think differently, we can really, make a different way of living and life possible. So step by step somehow.
Step by step.
Yeah.
Indeed, Niklas, you mentioned earlier the fact that the Nordic welfare system is heralded around the world as being fantastic, and mentioned also by the United States. If we look at the size of the United States and the size of the European Union, they're very comparable in population size. Europe has more people than the United States. But at the same time, it has the same kind of incremental, state structure. There are state governments. We have, member states. So it's a lot of people, especially during these elections in Europe, were mentioning the fact that, we can't even imagine how difficult it is to differentiate between federal income tax and how that's spent versus state income tax. What is the state's responsibility? What is the federal government's responsibility, especially in things like the pandemic situation? How do you, maybe Niklas, will start with you because it's probably the most different from what we can tell each other. How do you feel that Europe was able to help its member states through the pandemic now in 2020 and through planning for the kind of following crisis and the crisis that's already happening on an economic level? What have you experienced there?
Well, from the Finnish government's perspective, we're still discussing how to distribute the resources that the EU made available and what to focus them on. But from my perspective, I think the pandemic in all of the European countries was handled sort of much as it was in the United States, as it were, on a sort of a state level, so that all the countries, knowing that there might, or even not knowing that there might be some help, financial help from the EU, they had to make their decisions on their own and all the restrictions and so on. Having said that, especially the travel restrictions, which of course are the most, let's say, the ones that mostly concern the European level, were of course discussed on the European level, and the models were taken, and the sort of the benchmark was other European countries. But I mean, and even in the decision making in Finland during the pandemic, we always spoke about what other EU countries are doing, which decisions they are making, which restrictions they have before making our own decisions about restrictions. And I think at some point it was Finland and if it was Hungary or Bulgaria who had the strictest restrictions from other countries to come to us. And the discussion was that if the other countries are not having these strict restrictions, then we shouldn't have them either. So I think that the sort of the framework and the benchmarking was one of the key issues that EU provided.
And if we're thinking about the way, because we were talking before about if we can, you can take your healthcare with you, and potentially in the future really take your pension with you in a way that you can see how much you've contributed in each country. If we're talking this in times of crisis, like with the corona pandemic, the accessibility of the state, of each member state to its citizens in most of Europe is quite given. It's established. Everyone is registered somewhere. Everyone's somehow accounted for. This was a big problem when it came to distributing relief checks in the United States, for instance. Does that strength that the member states already possess, is that perhaps already a first step to the EU being able to provide relief on a union level?
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's so interesting that you mentioned it to compare the United States and.
I know Europeans hate that, but I just
no. I think it's nice because now we see, not that we're some better. No, but that we already have a lot of things which are working, and
we're way further along than the United States when it comes to knowing where our citizens are and how much they've paid into the system and these kind of things.
Yeah. And so it's a good starting point. I mean, maybe it helps even, or especially in these chaotic times, to think, okay, we have already something, not only focus about the chaos and the differentiations in the European Union. And so, what do we have here? It's really special, maybe, and how can we adapt it? I mean, planning the future or rethinking the future never means to make everything totally different. No, it's more about a recombination of different things. So what do we have, and how can we combine it that it makes more sense for our future? So this can be a starting point.
One of those like relief measures, and this was also discussed way before Corona. This was discussed in the 70s. Was discussed much earlier. Universal basic income, or unconditional basic income, bedingungslos in German. I'm not sure how you guys say it in Finnish, but it's either universal or unconditional. As far as everybody gets it, is the basic idea of having this basic income amount that is given to every citizen. The potential for that in Europe is perhaps closer than it is in a society like the United States because of the fact that these systems already exist. Finland has a special experimental, can I say sandbox approach to this at the moment? Okay, fantastic. Tell us about that, Niklas, and then I'd like to hear what Dita and Sarah think about it.
Well, this was, and I say was because it's technically over already. The Sandbox Experiment was an experiment that started by the previous government, of which I only have good things to say, of course. And the idea was to give every person within that test 560 euros a month unconditionally. The word you're looking for in Finnish is perustulo.
That's a great word.
You don't have to. You don't have to try to pronounce it. But the point is, it's a basic income as such. I'm afraid that the official takeaway from the experiment now, year and a half, 2 years after the experiment ended, is that it doesn't work. But it does have some positive takeaways. I mean, the biggest issue was, I think, our what we call Leiters, which is the sort of social healthcare organization that sort of provides social security. Their directors said that, for example, the sandbox was too small. There weren't enough people in the experimental group to compare to the control group.
Just for our viewers, how big was the sandbox?
Sorry, just 2,000 people.
2,000 people.
Out of 5.5 million. So the comparison was, well, technically, I suppose the control group was other unemployed people. So it's not 2,000 compared to 5.5, but it's 2,000 compared to a much larger number. Is the point? 560 euros they were given, and that money stayed with them without, even though if they received work. And the takeaway, I keep saying the official takeaway because my political background still gives me hope that this might work. The official takeaway was that there wasn't a huge difference in re-employment or employment of the people receiving the money, and people even didn't have a big issue going back to unemployment after not receiving the basic income anymore. But politically, I think the issue was that we should more move to sort of something I've been speaking about for, I think, 10 years, sort of a negative income tax system where yes, you get unconditional money, but that money is taxed away from any income that you get from work, which would keep the incentive on another level. And I suppose the biggest issue is that the unemployment benefit that a Finnish person gets, someone who is currently unemployed, even without the basic income system, is, dare I say it, too high. You get too much money for not doing anything. Sounds like a very right conservative point of view for a liberal, but the point is the level of unemployment benefits compared to the level of income that you can get from a low-paying job, as it were, is too different. The gap is too big, and that's the biggest issue, I suppose.
Those are really interesting insights. My question then to Christiane and Dieter is kind of two-sided. On the one side, is the goal of universal basic income to increase employment? ? And second question is, do we have to create? Do we have to change the unemployment structure that's in place in order for universal basic income to be implemented? I think those are. Yeah, that covers it. Maybe Dieter, you want to start us off with is the idea of universal basic income to decrease unemployment?
Sure. While there is one definition of UBI, the concept you hear in the political sphere all over the world, basically. I mean, there is also kind of a UBI movement in the US around Bernie Sanders, for example. Those concepts, they're very different, also in terms of the money you would get and so on. But all of the things have one thing in common. If you have a universal basic income where you get an amount of money where you can really have let's say a Western decent living condition, you do not have only to change the employment schemes, you have to change all of the schemes. So just for an example, if you would do a universal basic income about 870 euros in Austria, which is the amount you get from the old Mindestsicherung, so the minimum social security money you get. This is actually 10 million more than we give as a state to all social security projects. Pensions whatsoever. So you have not only to change the employment system. If you do that, you have to change your whole overall system. And this is where the discussion, in my point of view, gets very interesting, because we have a lot of programs which we think of working quite fine. For example, you have specialized program for people with disabilities, all of them gone because you now get the UBI, for example. And do we really want to do that? And the second thing, which here is quite interesting, is in general, the UBI discussion here in Europe is a discussion which is, in my point of view, anti-European. Because you see, okay, let's make a UBI in Germany or so. But then if you ask, okay, what happens if people from the Netherlands, for example, move to Germany? Do they get them? Yes or no? And this is the point where people say, well, this is for Germans only. And, you know, see, so all the things and the discussions we had about connectivity, and we're all Europeans, then starts to get a connotation of, let's say, welfare chauvinism, where you really have to say, oh, you know, our money for our people. And this is not really a European idea. So to make a long story short, we would not only have to change the unemployment schemes, we would have to change all of the schemes in terms of social security and labor market. And the second thing is, we really have to, and this is one so important outcome of this study, we have to think about mobilities when we create new social regimes.
Yeah, I think that's a key factor, and I want to get back to the mobility subject right after. But Christiane, just from what Dieter just said about the fact that we'd have to change everything, right? Everything would have to be changed. I know there has been experiments in Germany also with funding, through crowdfunding, funding a program that would provide UBI for a certain population, and that's been crowdfunded in Germany. Tell us a little bit about that, or what other experiments are being done in this idea of how do we finance this?
Yeah, I totally agree with Dieter that everything has to change then, or every system, because it's interconnected. But I think that it will change anyhow. So there is like the 50% we like politics are going in this direction. They can do something and change it, and the other 50% will be that the system is changing anyhow, and the people are changing. The mindset of the people is changing, and you can see that in this example of crowdfunding, universal basic income. And this is really interesting because they're going with this project in a second round because the first one worked so well. They're giving like even more money now to like, I don't know if there are 2,000 people as well. Of course, it's not defined before, but it depends on how much is coming together. And we're talking here about 1,200 euro. And of course, it's maybe not that representative, but you can visit the website and you see some different portraits from families, or like Patrick situations where people say, okay, I really had to work so much. I don't have the opportunity in my daily life to interconnect with my children or something, and this helps so much. But of course I still want to work because I love my job, but I can find different forms of that. So I really think, and there are some studies as well in terms of unemployment and long-term unemployment, there are like a little percentage of people like being unemployed or long-term unemployed, but the majority wants to do something. I think it's inherent in people, and so this would be again as well as to combine it. And this example of crowdfunding is so interesting as well because it's like the fourth sector style, the whole grassroots movements. People, if politics are not changing something, people are doing it by themselves. And because of digitalization and this connectivity, they have the opportunity. This is a really new level of self-empowerment we have in this global interconnected world today. We never had this before.
So this with the crowdfunding concept in Germany, when did this start and when was that initiated? Like, what was the idea behind that?
Oh, it started, I don't know, like a couple of years ago already, the first round. And it was like a guy, and he said, okay, I so deeply believe in this concept and just try it. Maybe it works. And so they had a video where they explained their idea, and this is interesting as well, a lot of people gave some money for it, without getting something back somehow. And then there was a lot of money, and other people could how do we say, access it or request it somehow. Of course, it was limited, but yeah,
kind of a closed sandbox.
It's kind of a closed sandbox, yeah. But then it worked so well, and they started like a new round for 1 year. This was a limited time, and now, as I said, there are like 1,200 euros, I think, people are getting, and it's pretty easy somehow. I mean, they're trying it, and
it's kind of a DIY redistribution.
Yeah.
So I want to get back to the subject of mobility a little bit, because that seems to be the crux of the European problem when it comes to this kind of a welfare measure or initiative. When we think about mobility in Vienna, that's a very big deal. Anyone who's spent any time in Vienna over the last few months has probably heard that 1/3 of Vienna cannot vote in Vienna, which is crazy. So, I mean, for democracy, it's a very difficult and crippling problem to have. And in Austria, voting rights are tied to citizenship, and citizenship is only allowed to acquire Austrian citizenship, you have to give up your former citizenship. So this is one thing. Some people argue that that's un-European, in a similar way that they're talking about the idea of saying, oh, if I move here, then can I take advantage of the social security system, and not providing that as un-European. So how can we evolve as member states to be more inclusive of other member states' citizens in an infrastructural or perhaps not when it comes to voting rights, but at least when it comes to taxation and welfare and social security in that sense. Maybe Niklas have the Nordics. You were talking about a lot of Finnish people work in Sweden, Swedish people work in Finland. Has there been a solution there that has helped cover this problem?
Well, I'm not sure if it's a solution that covers the problem entirely. We do allow people living in our municipalities to vote in the municipal elections in the where they live. That's tied to where you live. But in the national elections, you have to be a citizen. So people Swedish citizens living in Finland can't vote in the national elections, the parliamentary elections, and Finnish people living in Sweden have to vote in the Finnish parliamentary elections. So people living in Sweden but Finnish citizens, they post vote, which of course has been on the agenda recently. But they vote remotely from their embassies. I did that from Brussels when I worked there a few years ago. So the municipal elections, that to me seems logical. You vote where you live, but I'm not sure if you allow the mobility so that people who live in so you can vote in a parliamentary election in a country where you live, would that mean that, like you said, you have to give up voting rights in Sweden, for example? Can you vote in both countries? Can you vote in the Finnish parliamentary elections and the Swedish parliamentary elections, which often don't coincide? Or what is how many countries can you vote in is I suppose the question.
But to take it away from voting rights and just more on the social security front, I'm sorry to bring up the voting rights. It was just so recent in Vienna that they had this statistic, and it was surprising to me that a whole third of the city couldn't actually vote in the city's elections. in a similar way, those people are, for instance, covered by the social security system here in Austria because they're taxpayers and because this is their main place of residence, their Hauptwohnsitz, as they say in German. If you're working in Sweden, for instance, do you use your Finnish healthcare when you're there? Does your employer in Finland, who pays your pension, etc.?
Exactly. Well, when I worked in Sweden, I had a Swedish social security number that I used, and I used their healthcare system. My sister and brother went to school in Sweden, and so on. The pension was paid to my Swedish pension account, tied to that Swedish social security number, which admittedly now is in somehow, I'm not actually sure of the technical way, but it since 20 years back it's been tied to my Finnish number, so they know the Swedes know where I live, as it were. They're able to send.
There is already that connection between the pension accounts. So it's not just frozen in ether until you retire.
No, there is there's some. I'm not. I don't think I can access the money until I retire, and I'm not sure. I should look this up actually. I'm not sure how they know when I retire in Finland, because unless I live in Sweden at that point. But the Swedes have saved my pension, and they're notifying me yearly about the level.
So we're talking now about small changes in relatively large systems, but existing systems. As you said, we're much further along than other definitely other national unions, but also as member states, we're much further along than a lot of countries in the world when it comes to keeping track of our citizens' welfare, keeping track of Social Security, and these kind of things, these structures that are already there. Then if we look at it in the sense of these old systems, kind of these 70-year-old systems, and then these small solutions like the one Niklas just mentioned. So his pension account in Sweden is linked somehow to his Finnish. He doesn't even know how. Isn't that wonderful? Are these incremental changes? Do these happen on a bipartisan basis between member states, and then slowly become precedent and precedent and precedent in order to build into the mainstream, as you called it before?
Well, I think so, because it's not like a whole machine and you can stop it and then pause it for 2 months or something, or 2 years, and change everything, and then we have a complete new system of society. It has to be like that, because you can't pause the systems, and I think that's okay. It's good that it's like that, because if not, you can't deal with complexity. But as to stress it again, the main structure of a network, you can't have some connecting points, and you can try something in this area, and the whole system is flexible enough to deal with it. So this is a good thing about this structure, and if you think it like that, it's even more possible.
One of the ways that you talked about in your presentation and in the study, talked about building these networks, is also this experimentational approach, and really just saying, let's try this out in a smaller form, perhaps not as small as Niklas's example of the 2,000 people, maybe a little bit bigger, but maybe to as kind of a final topic that I like to touch on is this idea of how can we in our member states, in our various functions, so whether you're coming from the politician side, from the research side, how can we make this experimentation more possible within the EU? What's stopping us from being as experimental as we want to be? Maybe Dieter, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a total new way of policy creation, and also from the political side, but also from us as citizens, because we have demands, and then the politicians, they respond in some certain way of. And if you have this new form of experimental thing, it's a process. It's not like, these are my demands, this is your approach. We have the system like vote, and then I get hopefully what I've asked for. But it's more of a process. It's It's a kind of participative way of getting new results. And this is something we're not necessarily we do not have necessarily in our mindsets to develop those things. And also being in a sandbox, I mean, from a mental point of view, just think of it, this is also something where we have to have this debate both within our societies in the member states, but also on the European level. Just think about it to say, you know, there is now a sandbox in terms of poverty, and you're now 60, and we develop something on the way. And don't worry, everything will be fine, but things may change for you. And you're 60 years old, you probably get some social security thing. Just think about the mindset you need to have to participate as a citizen in this kind of setting. But I think it's important because just think about what we can learn, for example, from the Finnish experiment. What we have seen, for example, is that the mental health condition really improved for people who got the UBI. And I think, thinking of, for example, right now we're during Corona, we see mental health issues are popping up everywhere. Mm-hmm. And especially in Vienna, since we had a terrorist attack not even 2 weeks ago. So just, for example, as a short-term relief, for example, looking at that and say, we have, let's say, a fixed unemployment for everyone might be a thing temporarily, for example, to have some mental health relief. Does it help in terms of unemployment? Not necessarily, but we can learn from those experiences, and we will see that mental health, for example, is something that will emerge as a topic in 2021 even more than it is now. But we can learn from those experiments and put it in the context we're dealing with.
I think that's a great example as well. They did a study in Vienna after they, anyone who's visited, I don't know if Niklas has been to Vienna, but they have in the subway they have a little indicator that says 2 minutes or 3 minutes, you know, how long it's going to be until you're waiting for the subway. And they did an experiment to see, you know, how frustrated people got. People were much more calm at the subway station. They were much less agitated when they missed the subway. So like when they barely got there and then the doors closed, right? And then it said 2 minutes, they're like, oh, okay, 2 minutes. Even if it took 10 minutes for the subway to come, the fact that it said 2 minutes made everyone feel better. So this kind of managing expectations, I think, is for mental health. I think that's a very, very important part of this kind of universal approach, if one can have one. Niklas, sorry, I think you wanted to say something.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, then, how do you feel about this idea of approaching things in a kind of more universal way? What's realistic in the way we were talking about experimenting? How can we be experimental as Europe?
No, I definitely agree with the comments from before. I mean, like I said, I think the experiment we did, the sandbox, was too small, and Diese put it very succinctly when he said that there are so many other issues than just employment that can be gained from this. But I mean, speaking of, I think you mentioned that we should we sort of do a state-wise, I mean, European member state-wise sandbox, so the one member state suddenly has universal basic income, whereas the others don't, and then compare. I think that requires, again, like Dieter said, a bigger change in the entire system. And again, I suppose it needs a sort of a Europe-wide social security before that thing works. And I think the biggest issues now still, even though the bilateral deals between countries work fine, the biggest issue is how to get the system, Europe-wide, in the sense that you can move from one country to another, to a third one, and back to the first one, and don't end up like my father, who according to the Finnish the tax authority, didn't exist for 2 weeks because he had moved from from England to Sweden and back to Finland. So I think that's where the technology again comes in. How do you get the system working sort of universally, as it were.
So is the technology aspect of it, I mean, this is also a little bit of a sandbox experimental question, right? I mean, this technology has to be tested, but at the same time, is it perhaps already existing technology that where we just need to create more farther-reaching systems? So Dieter mentioned, for instance, having you have your European emblem on your e-card, so you can go get healthcare everywhere. Maybe a European identifier number or a European passport. Would that change things? Nicholas, I'm still with you. Sorry.
Sorry,
Yeah.
the question was to me.
Yes.
No, I think I would say yes. I mean, that's why we're working on the similar system for the for the Nordic countries, and I know Denmark and Sweden are further along on that axis, which is, I suppose, a funny way of looking at it. The fact that it's a Nordic ID that all, let's say 5, or if we also count the Baltic states, which we sometimes do, but at least the 5 Nordic countries would have together. Then, but some countries are further along in implementing that, and that I think having sort of working on the premise of the European healthcare is probably, in my view, the right way to go. I'm just not sure how it. I mean, I think there's a difference between sort of a one-off or a short-term case where you hit your head in Germany and get healthcare before you're sent back to Finland, and the system recognizes this, and the money that needs to move does move, whereas. If you sort of start a life in another country, again, back to what Dieter said earlier, there's so much more involved than just one system. And we're having issues in this country, even having our own healthcare systems discussing, I mean, from one city to another, discussing with each other. So how we're going to make it, the social security system work over the entire Europe, I couldn't say at the moment. Okay. But I encourage it.
I think it's really great how positive you are, and also that the Nordics are already taking steps in this direction, and very vehemently standing behind their decision to do so. I think that's fantastic. Dieter, how do you think this will play out, and do you think this idea of maybe a European identity number or something like this would make a difference in the speed with which we can implement something like this?
Yeah, I think so, because symbols matters. Because if we think about how we think about ourselves and our environments, that changes how we behave. And especially when we think about social security, you cannot design social security policies detached from the situation how the society is living. So if we really have those symbols and this mindset of this network and of this interconnectivity, you kind of have to adapt to that in terms of policies. If we just think nation-minded and do not see what we have in common and what we have developed through the European Union, then you will have differences also when you design policies. So I think this is important, and I think a good step would be to re-evaluate the rights and the obligations you as a citizen have when you're within the EU member states. So, for example, what rights and obligations do you have in terms of unemployment, in terms of old age poverty, and so on? And then, if you talk about, okay, what does this let's say European citizenship mean? Then you start to developing solutions, and this sometimes could be data sharing. This sometimes could be, let's say, just to have a guarantee that a specific system exists in all EU member states. And sometimes it might be that you say, okay, we want to have a common system. So I think that all of those things those are tools. And you can use all those tools, but if you start defining what this citizenship means, then you start to get a way forward.
I think that's a beautiful, beautiful concept. I wanna allow our in-person guest. I'm sorry, gents, but our in-person guest to have the last word here in this discussion. Looking to the future and really talking about, as Dieter mentioned, with the identity. What does it mean to be a European citizen? What does it mean for my social welfare? What does it mean for my livelihood and my security going forward? What do you envision coming to us, maybe in the next 2 or 3 years?
Well, I think that every trend has a counter trend, and the more global everything gets, the more individualized everything gets, the more important for people is to come back to have like an European identity maybe, or even a national, but they will have both. And so I think this is a good base to think that global and local as well, to make new steps and to, it sounds a little cheesy, a little realistic, but I really deeply believe that we can build then all together a new society and a good future. Like every citizen, every individual, together with the state, together with politics, or even companies, to interconnect in these sectors as well. And that means that society can never be fixed once, but it's a process, and it will be in the future even more a process. But yeah, let's face it. And
I think
nice.
the way you speak about it in the study and the way you talk about it now in the discussion is really inspiring. We're these tiny little data points, and anyone who's analyzed big data knows that it's all these little networks that feed into bigger networks, into bigger networks, into bigger networks, and all of a sudden you have something that's really, really substantial and immensely complex. But it starts with just two little things interacting with each other and creating a network. I think this was a really fantastic discussion. We don't have any more time to continue, but I'd like to say a big thank you to Dieter Feierabend, Niklas Manfolk, and Christiane Varga for speaking with me today. Also to Daniel earlier for giving us those welcome words. And to you, dear viewers, for watching. Thank you so much. We wish you a wonderful evening and all the best, and do your best to do your part in the future of basic social security in the 21st century. Thanks very much.